Talking about reunions, I had one recently. It was a 50th college reunion. Now, in preparation for the 50th college reunion, we had a 48th college reunion, and that was the first one we'd had in 48 years, which was 2 years ago. If you've ever been to a reunion, it's kind of a shocking experience. I mean, there were a bunch of old people there. I was just chagrined. I mean, these were people that were kind of walking with, I mean, we all had to have pictures of ourselves of what we looked like 48 years ago, or we wouldn't have known anyone. And so the first reunion was kind of like shock therapy, okay? we were just kind of shocked in positive ways in some ways and in some not so positive ways in other ways. But the reality is that was a great time. But we decided that because we were getting older that it probably would be good not to have another reunion in 48 more years later. So that we thought maybe we ought to get together every couple of years because we really did enjoy one another's company. So we came to the second reunion, which was just a few weeks ago down in Florida. And a couple of them had discovered that I'm kind of a people person, and just a few. But no, they asked me if I'd kind of coordinate a discussion, just kind of lead in a discussion of during one part of the reunion. And what I did was I reminded them of some words that appear oftentimes in the poetical literature of the scriptures. Oftentimes you'll see, especially in Psalms and Proverbs, you'll see three words that appear in the same verse that all seem to be synonyms, but they all seem to be also quite different, or otherwise why would you have three words in the same verse? So I'm going to read one of those verses to you. It's in the book of Proverbs, and it goes like this. The wise lay up knowledge, so that's the word that I would kind of circle if you had your Bibles open, but the mouth of a fool brings ruin near. On the lips of him who has understanding, circle, wisdom, circle, is found. So you have three words circled: knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So as we were all gathered in this room, I said, we graduated from college, from Bible college. We had Bible college, degrees. And we left Bible college 50-some or 40-some years ago. And we had a lot of knowledge. We kind of knew a lot about God. In other words, I had good grades in theology and in the courses that I took. And we knew about God. We knew that He had characteristics that were wonderful and significant. We talked about His omnipotence, and we talked about His omniscience, and we talked about other characters, that made up the nature of God. And we knew a lot about God. We knew that He loved us. We knew He was gracious. We knew He was merciful. And we could say those words, and we could say them with conviction, well, at least a level of conviction, because we didn't understand them all, but we knew about them. And there's a lot of things that we know about God. And then I said, and now it's 50 years later, and we're beginning to understand God. You see, we knew Him, but we really didn't understand Him. We knew that He loved us, but we hadn't experienced His love in the variety of situations that would confront us in the context of the intermediate 50 years that would cause us to say, I loved Jesus then as much as I could love Him as a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, but now I really understand this God who gave Himself for me. And so, but in the middle, it got really kind of ugly. There were times when it was good. There were times that it was bad. There was times that it was incredibly hard. There were times that we wanted to quit. There were times that we did quit. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today as I was talking to them. Because I would like just to hear your stories of how in that period of time God produced something in you that you didn't have when we graduated 50 years ago. And the stories were incredible. They were very, very sad stories. They were joyful stories. All of us had crises in our lives. All of us had things that we had to deal with that were very unpleasant, and there were blessings along the way. And that's just part of the journey. And so I define trials. Trials, those were the things that we endured. I define trials as the things that cause us to integrate what it is that we know about something, what we know about God, into the practical situations where we find ourselves, because that's what trials are. We're constantly, trying to figure out what it is that we know. How do we integrate that? How do we use that in ways that are going to enable us to have a greater understanding of God? I mean, think about, going to school and we were learning math. We were learning all these mathematical ways of being able to change things and to do things that we didn't otherwise know how to do. And we learned about equations, and we learned about all these things that would enable us to be effective in our lifetime. And how many of you walked out of the math class and said something like, I'll never use this again in my life? And yet there were those little exercises that were in the middle that we just kind of used the exercises, and as a result of the exercise we could see, how that principle of math could be applied to this particular problem, and the end result would be something that would change. And so I think when James says in James chapter 1, count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials. The trials, sometimes we think of them as the miserable things, and they certainly are miserable sometimes. But it could just be anything. The temptation to cheat, the temptation to lie or to exaggerate, the temptation to do any number of things, and we're left to try to figure out how does that, that temptation, that trial, that opportunity to integrate what it is that we know into a practical situation, how does it work? And what happens when it does work, and what happens when it doesn't work in relationships to the character that God is continually developing within us. And so I think it all meets together. I think James, or 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, think of it this way, there is no trial overtaken you, but it's just common to man. But God is faithful, who will suffer to be tried, not above your abilities, but will with the trial also make a means of being able to escape so that you might be able to bear it. And that's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful promise. But in the midst of all of that, it gets really confusing and it gets really, really, really messy. And in the midst of it, when we don't know what to do, James gives us the answer. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who loves to give it to you. He gives it liberally and doesn't resent the fact that we come to him and ask for it. But ask in faith, without wavering. Don't be like the cork on the seashore that just is bouncing all around, but trust him to do what it is that he's promised to do. Now, I think that's been a lesson for life for me, because I thought a lot about those words over the years, and as we began to share them together in the context of our little class, that graduated from a little tiny Bible college 50 years ago, we were able to kind of come to an understanding of the fact that in the midst of all of it, God was there. Now, there's a principle in what it is we're talking about here today, because something, you have learned some things about development here. And now you're going to go back, and the challenge is, how do I integrate that which I know about some of these principles that Jerry's talked about, some of the things that you can do? How do I integrate that into my world? Because not all of our worlds are the same. How do I take what it is that I learned here this week, and how do I apply it over here? And to the degree that you begin to do that, you begin to understand it better. But somewhere in the middle, it's going to get messy and it's going to get difficult, and you're going to have, and then you cry out for wisdom. Lord, help me to understand how I can take this principle and apply it into this situation so that hopefully this result might occur. And so I hope that you understand that, this is a process. When I was in seminary, I had to get a job, because that's what you have to do in order to be able to survive while you're going to school. And so I had to have a job to pay tuition. I had to have a job to take care of my family. And so I got a job, believe it or not, selling tombstones. And go tell me, I didn't have a clue, how to sell tombstones. And I was working at the time. I was offered a job at the Tombstone place. I was working at a gas station. It was a service station, and it basically actually provided service, unlike gas stations today. I mean, it was the time and place where, you know, you'd be sitting outside the gas station and somebody would drive in and we'd all run up to the car and we'd check the oil, in the tires, we'd fill up their gas, wash their windshield. We do all of that. They don't do that at gas stations anymore. But it was during that era in our country. But next door to our gas station, there was a Tombstone company. And it was run by a really, really old man, like my age. And he was not as, admittedly, probably not as in as good a shape as I am, but because he was like creaky, and he's walking out with this hand truck, and you know, he'd sell a stone and he'd have to go get it off the yard and take it in and do sandblasting on it. And so he's taking these 500-pound stones, these really heavy stuff, and I'd see him walking out like this, and if I didn't have a car that I was waiting on, I'd say, hey, listen, his name was Gus. I said, listen, Gus, let me help you with that. Don't start. So I'd run over to him and I said, let me do this. And so he really liked me because I just was nice to him. So he sells this business to this guy, and he says, and the guy comes and they don't have a manager. And he says, well, can you recommend anybody for a manager? And he says, well, I don't know anybody. He says, you know, Jerry over there, I don't think he knows anything about monuments or granite, but he's really strong as an ox, and you might want to just ask him. And so they asked me to come and to run this company. And I said what you would probably have said, and that is, I said, I haven't got a clue how to do this. And the guy says, don't worry. He says, we're going to send you to granite school. And so they sent me to Barrie, Vermont, which is, you know, where there's a lot of granite. And I go to this granite school for 2 days. It's kind of like, you know, Granite 101. And I'm like learning granite, you know, and there are different kinds of granite, and there's different densities of granite, and there's granite that comes from Europe, and granite that comes from all over the world, and has different colors and different qualities. And I kind of learned all of that, and I understood it. So when people were coming in that, you know, were PhDs, you know, they were working in industry. I mean, they were 10 times smarter than I was. And when they're coming into my granite shop, you know, I could tell them, you know, while they were facing, you know, the decision to make a decision as it relates to this or that or the other thing, I could tell them, you know, the various qualities of each one. And so when I walked out that day, I got a diploma. I got my granite diploma. I take it everywhere I go because I want people to see it. I'm a certified granite guy. I'm your man. You want to know about granite? I can tell you all about granite. So I got a granite diploma. But the man said something to me that I never, ever, ever forgot. When he shook my hand and gave me my diploma or certificate, he says, now, Jerry, you now know 90% more about granite than anybody you will ever talk to. And you know, that helped me. Believe it or not, that really helped me. Because when these, you know, unbelievably smart people come in, you know, these very professional business people, you know, who probably have forgotten all more than I will ever know, I just went out and I would see them and I'd be intimidated by them, and then I would say, I know 90% more about granite than he knows. And so I could walk out in confidence and say this, that, and the other thing. Now let me tell you something. This is a long story to tell you what it is that you need to hear. When you leave here tomorrow, you will know 90% more about development than anybody you will ever talk to. I can just assure you of that. And all that means is, you know, be confident in this. Be confident in what it is that you're doing. Be confident, not proud or arrogant, but confident that you're doing something that basically, you know, it can be used of the Lord. It's just a tool, but it can be used of the Lord to help you accomplish what it is that God's called you to do. So you have a little bit of knowledge now, and more knowledge than you had when you left. You know, next year when we get together and I meet people in the hallway, all during the forum of people who've been in this session before, who've said, you know, Jerry, that stuff really works. And they weren't convinced when they left, but now they've seen it happen and they're beginning to understand things that they didn't know before. And in the midst of it, they've been just working like you will work when you go back, right in the trenches of what it is that needs to be done in order to move your ministry from where it is to where it is that it needs to be. So that's the devotion for this morning. So probably one of several that you've had already today. But that's, I think, I just really love that analogy of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. It's been really, really helpful to me.